wanted to talk about one thing that I've really been thinking about lately. It's really been on my mind. We talked about it before on the channel, but I was like, I want to talk about this again, right? My question is, when a problem belongs to everybody, when it belongs to everybody, does it really actually belong to anybody? You know what I'm saying? Like, does it belong to anybody? Because if everybody's responsible for it, who's actually going to do the job? Who's going to handle the situation? And I feel like the more you look at the news, the more you start to see it. Because, okay, think about it this way. Think about it in our everyday lives. Like, um, when we talk about like teamwork, when we talk about collaborations, partnerships, committees, boards, agencies, departments. I'm looking at my notes, all the communities I can think of that are included, oversight structures. Like on paper, all this stuff sound good. It be sounding good. It sound real good until you actually need somebody to do something. Right? It always sounds good. They always got a policy written down. Oh, this is where you go. This is who you talk to. We got an SOP. We got a playbook, right? And then you're asking them, how is this actually being handled? Who do you actually hold accountable? And now all of a sudden it starts to look like we playing a ping pong game and start looking a lot like tennis, right? Ping here, ping, 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 ping. So that made me ask a question, right? What really happens when stuff goes wrong, right? And not just at that real surface level, but at a more complex level. Like, how does that impact the individual, right? When stuff goes wrong, and we talk about the conversation of accountability. So y'all know me, I wrote some questions down. And here's we're gonna just pop through some of these. Y'all can tell me y'all thoughts. That's why we jumped on the mobile version, right? Boom. My question is, when responsibilities become like too distributed, right? Because what if it's everybody's problem, then technically it's nobody's problem. So if the accountability and the responsibility to act is distributed amongst a team of people or various departments or various agencies in the government or various whomever, right? Who's actually taking ownership of the problem at hand? So that brings us back to our question. I'm gonna give y'all some examples too. So if everybody's problem can become nobody's problem, right? If five people, I'm gonna give you an example. So if five people are responsible for something, you think about like a team project, you're at work or you have a family project, you're doing, y'all signing up to do family reunion. It's around the summertime, right? So we have these projects, we have these things going on, right? Each person's supposed to assume, let's say, a certain responsibility, right? Everyone's supposed to assume a certain level of work, right? But then you have something that people didn't actually pick up because while you mapping it out, there's always gonna be things that y'all don't always have fully mapped out, right? So then you have the result being the problem, right? Because now we're sitting midway through a situation and we got a problem, right? If nobody's taking accountability for that one problem, because we're all like, well, I took on my project, I took on my task, I told you I would do this, and I'm doing it, right? Somebody else got to do it, right? Somebody else got to figure it out. That problem just sits there. The problem sits there, right? Until it becomes an issue that now is just sitting out there on limbo, right? That's just a regular everyday example of what I'm trying to say. A lot of times we're sitting on these teams, these projects, and we have a task that we've been working on, right? But then there's also some things that technically the group is responsible for that doesn't get handled. And somehow we have like what I like to call a shift of liability that happens. Everybody's saying, oh, it's this person's responsibility. Or maybe it's more closely aligned with that person. So let's stick it there. Let's stick it there. Let's stick it there. And then what happens? We have a consequence that somebody has to absorb. So if you planning out the family reunion, okay, well, the family members or the participants of that event are going to have to absorb the fact that y'all didn't properly handle that because you left some things just sitting there. If you at work, well, we know what happens in work situations. You're going to probably have your KPIs ducked, even if you're like, oh, that wasn't a part of my. It was some would assume that you should have been handling it, but you guys didn't. So now you have this issue. Now, flip it on the other side when it comes to administration, right? We know they don't typically have to absorb the hit the same exact way, right? If it's an issue where they didn't kind of address something, you know what's gonna happen? They really gonna shift the liability. They gonna ping pong that thing until you're tired of asking who was supposed to help you. You're gonna try to allocate and pull resources together for you to do it yourself. What ends up happening at that point? Well, people don't think about the distress that actually happens when you're put in situations like that. We kind of just talk about like an everyday thing, but that's actually a pretty stressful situation to be in. You put in a situation, you thought you had one responsibility, one role. You come to find out, maybe it wasn't that way, right? Or you're put in a situation where you're realizing that somebody dropped the ball somewhere and you're trying to figure out how can we remedy this situation, right? And you're trying to go through whatever mechanics and whatever process they have in place to help you figure it out. If you're in a work environment, like most situations you'll observe, oh, go to this department. So your first thought might be like, okay, let me go to my lead, team lead or something like that. Oh, okay, next thing might go to management. Oh, we don't know. Go to HR. Oh, I don't know. Maybe send a person to compliance. Oh, maybe go to legal. And all the time that you're saying, wait, we're reviewing this claim or we're reviewing this concern. This is time that you're sitting in the thick of it, a situation, right? You're sitting trying to figure out what you want to do and you're taking all of those hits. And when I say all of those hits, people don't realize that psychologically, like the way you process things, your mind is not differentiating between when you get physically hit or if you're getting like an emotional hit, right? So you just are identifying the fact that you feel distressed, right? You're like, hey, I don't feel safe. This feels dangerous, right? So your body starts to behave in a manner consistent with that. And you'll notice sometimes even if you go look through, let's say working situations, which is going to be our case study for today, like the working kind of environment. We'll dibble and dabble in a couple of other examples, but just for the sake of having this conversation, right? In a work situation, you'll notice sometimes people start to report getting sick at work, right? They start to show all these stress responses before they usually take off. And then you look before that, and there's usually some type of incident where they were trying to resolve certain kinds of things, and those things just didn't get resolved. And they kept absorbing the impact, absorbing the hit, absorbing all of that. So that just made me kind of question because we're gonna take this a little bit further. I just wanted to pick something I felt like was relatable to like most of us, like a work situation or some type of like family programming project type of situation. Like what happens like systemically? I'm thinking about like the system, right? Because systems can debate like jurisdictions, right? Like I said, it goes here, it goes there, it goes there. If you at work, it's this department, that department. Maybe if it's government, it's gonna be like just jurisdiction, that jurisdiction. You're talking about like committees and things like that. Oh, it's this person, it's that person, right? Every person but them, right? And you've already determined it's probably not you. So it's everybody but the person that's involved in the conversation. Once again, the shifting of the liability. Meanwhile, that person is impacted and they're literally absorbing all the consequences because until you can shift it onto somebody else, you gotta hold this. It's kind of like if somebody gave you a FedEx package and it's all like rocks or something, and you just carrying all the weight of this situation. You have to hold that until you have a place to put it. So you're just walking around holding that weight. From that perspective, right? If you're absorbing all the consequence, I want you to think from each system that we generally talk about on this channel, that's the consumer absorbing the harm. That is the constituent, right? Us, if we're talking about like government situations, that's us absorbing the harm. The patient at the hospital, like the previous examples, right? The customer at the store, the employee, right? If we want to go with our earlier example, like we literally see this everywhere. Like we see it in healthcare. Healthcare say something like it's billing. Send that over to billing. That's an admin issue. Send it over to admin. That's a compliance issue, right? And you're like, I just want to be able to resolve this matter, but they're going to ping pong you everywhere, right? We're processing this claim, right? Government might say something along the lines of like, that's another agency. Yeah, I can see how that happens. We tend to get referrals often, et cetera, and so forth. No, that's another agency. Your complaint is under review, right? For X amount of time based off of the governance that they might have, right? We're waiting on guidance. Those are things you might have said to you, like in a more government setup. In a more corporate setting, I just feel like they might say that's just not their department, and that's a full blown shift of liability. Like, we don't want nothing to do with it. It's over there. And at some point, um, the question really becomes like, who owns the problem? Because the only way you're going to be able to effectively solve the problem is if you actually know who owns it, so that you can like directly discuss, mediate, resolve, address with them, right? And that's important because that's a piece of the accountability that I've been talking about. Accountability doesn't always mean like punishment. Accountability means like someone has ownership so that we can figure out how we want to process next steps, right? Someone has authority, someone has like responsibility, someone feels empowered to act, right? When I talked about the group project, right? We all took our piece, and once we took our piece, we said we don't want no more responsibility, right? We don't want to be accountable to have to address this additional thing. We don't want to feel empowered to act. We don't want to act, right? And that becomes the problem. And that's why we have this current question. Without ownership, problems often just linger indefinitely. They just linger too dang on long. And then you end up having too many problems manifest as a byproduct of that, right? And hello to everybody in the chat. Hello. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring this on here. I just wanted us to chit chat and kind of talk about what does that really mean when it's everybody's responsibility, because often that means it's nobody's responsibility. And we're starting to see a lot of this start to play out in the news as well. Why do I pick the particular format that I just started with today? Because I feel like it's really relatable. I feel like if we can think about how we tend to see this on the everyday, maybe we as a group, a collective, as people can start to figure out how we can help people help us get out of some of the situations that we find ourselves placed in. Especially when I start to think about like things that we see on the news with the levels of accountability. How can we help those who need to be accountable be a little bit more accountable, take a little bit more ownership to like really be empowered to act in a way that is conducive to the outcomes that we need and that actually is in alignment with what the constituencies asks of them. Um, in the same way that we would ask to see it, maybe in corporate America, maybe like in healthcare or, school projects, family reunions, whatever the case may be. It's all the same. Um, I'll look to see if y'all have any more comments in here. Okay, so I said hello to everybody. Hi, hi. I'm getting newer with this mobile, so I'm trying to figure out how I can respond to your chats. I know there's a button or something I can press. But it's not letting me do it. So I'll come back to that piece. But it just made me wonder from that perspective, right? Like, what does a good system look like? Because we talk about, I made a whole like model on accountability and like pretty much how the individual absorbs impact. But just from a conversational perspective, like what does a good system look like, right? Because we're talking about the shifting of liability. We talk about how they ping pong things a lot. We talked about how there's somewhat a lack of that sense of empowerment to address issues. So my question becomes like, what does an actual good system look like when we're talking about accountability? What does that look like? Because we're asking for it, but I don't know if we've actually defined what it looks like. Once we've defined as a people what it looks like, then we can start to hold people a little bit more accountable because we can start to embed that language into the positions or into the expectations or into the language that's used in their reviews, you know, uh, of performance, right? Because something's got to give. Something has got to give. And that's just been like on my mind when a problem affects the public. I'm trying to always figure out like who should be responsible to make sure it gets solved, right? We have two many things going at the same exact time. Sometimes I feel like they just keep having problems pop off, pop off. I mean, we literally pole boat into problems like every week. Like every week it's something else, right? And I'm someone who's of the school of thought that we should be trying to resolve some of these issues. We shouldn't have so many things just sitting on the table. It's just bad governance, it's just bad practice, bad business. It's just uncomfortable and it's not cool to start there. It's just not cool, right? So when a problem affects the public, I said these other vignettes, somewhat case study perspectives, for the purpose of saying, like, from the perspective of the public, the general public, us, right? When a problem affects the public, who should be responsible for making sure that it actually gets resolved? I don't like the ping pongy business that I feel like we often have been subjected to, right? I'm not in favor. I sit in opposition of that. So if I sit in opposition, we need to also be sitting in a place and posture of saying, what would we like it to look like? Even if we don't sit in a position to do, we should be able to at least offer something like saying, what do we think it should look like? And that made me want to ask my people, like, what do we actually feel like a good system looks like, a good system of accountability? Because if everybody's responsible for giving us an answer, we're never going to get an answer. We need to pinpoint who is going to give us the answers that we need, who has the power to actually give us what we need. And then we can start to put in um different mechanics of, like, how, like, the procedural pieces of that. But at this point, we're starting to learn that, like, so much of what we thought was supposed to happen isn't happening. So much of how we thought it would occur isn't occurring. So it just made me kind of think about that. I'm just give y'all a couple more analogies I had written down. Then I'm gonna pop off if I don't see any more comments. Right. Um, outside of just saying, like, the family reunion, outside of saying your uh, group project, right? Outside of saying healthcare, outside of saying governance, let's just take few more analogies, a couple other opportunities to kind of look at this idea so we can think about it from a systems perspective, right? So, like an apartment building analogy, like everyone sees a leak, right? Maintenance says it's management. Management says it's the contractor who was working on the building, right? Contractor says it's the supplier. Meanwhile, the ceiling is still leaking. You know what I'm saying? Y'all shifting liability. The ceiling is leaking. Can we fix this leaky ceiling? Y'all want to ping pong it everywhere but where it ought to be, right? We do we want people to say, hey, like, it's you? Yeah, but we also need the corrective action, and we're looking for that. And I feel like the process of everyone trying to say it's them, it's them, it's them, it's them, we're not getting corrective action. So the next example, to dive back into that group project just a little bit deeper, the 5 people assigned to the project, nobody volunteers to own the project, right? So everybody's on the project because it sounds good to be on a little project. It sounds good, but then nobody's actually volunteering to own the fact that we brought this to the closure. There's no, like, project manager, so to speak, right? So the deadline arrives, and then everyone's surprised that it wasn't successful. But did you actually make sure you were invested in making sure that this was successful? Right. The accountability, the responsibility elements. I got another analogy. I had to chat a few, but I'll just give you just one more. Um, let's take like emergency analogy. Like, let's see. So, like, emergency response system, it is designated as an incident commander, right? So if everybody is in charge, nobody's, like, in charge, right? Because if you're in an emergency response situation, if you've ever worked in that, you know that generally you have it written down who's supposed to do what at what time and what position assigned. But imagine we have this system in place, but then people don't want to pick up the jobs or pick up the responsibility or roles that they're supposed to, and you're in an emergency situation. This is not the time to be playing shifting liability games. It's not the time to ping pong. It's not the time for tennis, style arrangements, right? You just been pole bolted into a crisis. We need people who are going to respond. So that's why I give those kind of analogies, because if you think about what's been happening in the general public, you think about what's happening in society right now, what's happening in all these different economies, how they're all being affected. I just was watching the news. Um, Actually, it's called the GBN News in the UK, and they were talking about how by the end of the decade, they're going to be in a really bad financial situation. And multiple economies are in really bad financial situations. And it just makes you wonder who is going to take accountability, because if it's everybody's responsibility, right? There's nobody's responsibility. We need someone to pinpoint and say, hey, take the charge. Let's start directing certain things so that we can get better outcomes. So that just made me think, because I just feel like right now, when I watch the news, I just see a lot of it was them. It's somebody else. It's always somebody else. Somebody else and something else. It's never the committees that are supposed to be handling it. It's never the departments are supposed to be handling it. It's never the people who are supposed to be handling it. And all this shifting of liability is happening, but there's no corrective action happening. There's no action to change the outcomes that need to be changed relevant to the positions that people are supposed to be sitting in. So I just asked on this chat, or this live rather, what do you feel like a good system would look like? Because that's the kind of things I would be more interested in us kind of digging into. And you know me, I'm always going to be chewing and digging through something. So that was my question for this morning. Um, because I feel like I wanted to go on bigger things. I don't want to talk about isolated individual things that are happening in the news, because I feel like they often are stemming from really big conversations that we probably should be having. So once again, this is Adrian from Legally Everywhere. Child, we'll be looking into everything. It was just a question that was on my mind. I've been listening to the news, and that was a theme that I picked up on. And now I'm deciding, since I see that y'all like this mobile version of the live, I'll just bring some of these questions while they're like in my mind. I'll bring them to y'all before I start trying to do like my little PowerPoints and I like to bring y'all the receipts in PowerPoint form, right? I like to bring y'all the receipts. Y'all know how I feel about that. Receipt buffet is a thing here, okay? I will drop whatever receipts I find on my page, but I think it's really helpful for people to see like how my brain has been processing the information. Like as I see the news, as it comes, like thematically, what are we seeing theme wise? What patterns are we starting to really recognize are popping up, so that we can kind of like just pinpoint that, mark that, down and say, let's come back to it. Let's get some more receipts. Let's get some more information. Let's marinate, you know, let's annotate, come back and marinate again. And then we can start to have some lively discussion. So y'all just kind of catching me mid thought of looking through some stuff. Cause I was like, you know what? I feel like there's a lot of shifting of liability that's happening, because nobody wants to be accountable. Nobody wants the punishment. And half the time we look up the positions online and we find that, at least in the US, a lot of those punishments don't really seem to be thoroughly written out. We don't know what the course of action of consequence really is, which is an issue within itself. Um, I was watching some stuff with the UK, right? And they have like a public office misconduct that was put into place at the end of last year. It very clearly outlines what happens when somebody in a certain kind of position does something that's not in alignment with what they were supposed to be doing. We watched shortly after that went into act, or went into, place, enacted, however you want to say. Um, we've seen that one of the highest ranking royals was stripped of their position, right? We've seen one of the highest ranking public officials, right? Governmental officials, they were taken, their position was taken from them, and we saw them get booked, arraigned, get picked up. We seen them go through all the mechanics of that process, right? Conversely, when we see things that happen here in the US, kind of talked about it yesterday, but we watch congressional hearings. We watch congressional hearings and they say, "Oh, I don't feel like answering your question. I don't have to." Or they try to tie up the time and don't really answer within the time frame that's allotted to address certain questions. I remember a couple days ago, like I seen something where the person literally said, "Hey, you were saying things in opposition of the truth," and the person comes like, "Oh, okay, well." Like basically, what you gonna do about it? Like, I thought that was absolutely flabbergasting. I was so shocked that that was even being permitted. But like, what is the consequence? Because Congress itself kind of couldn't like I'll say that differently. They would have to still go through the legal process, right? They would still have to go get booked and like the what is this? Okay. Like they would still have to have like the police pick them up, arraign them, go through all that process. Like Congress can't wouldn't be the ones necessarily doing that. We would still do congressional hearing all that, but they wouldn't be the ones like doing that portion. That's a separate portion. We don't seem to see that same like continuity here. I feel like as I've observed it occur in the UK. So it just always made me ask questions because of like such a shift of liability. Because everyone's saying, why are we seeing all these things happening um in those congressional hearings, but we don't see action? And it was like, well, they're like, oh, well, we're not the ones. We can't force them to go to jail. We can't force it. Well, who's supposed to be picking some of these people up when they come in there and they perjure and they say that they have mishandled funds, government funds, that people, the economy is bad, right? And people don't have money. And when you're saying that there are corporations or companies where people have mishandled funds and or done things that could cause damage or harm to the public, people who had public trust, like we've been talking about public trust a couple days, right? If the public trusted you to do your job, right, whether you're the bank or some other kind of corporation, if the government, but better yet the people trusted you to do your job and you in fact don't do it, or you disregard certain things, or you put things in such a way where it's kind of like whatever, like who holds you accountable? And when we're seeing these people put in these congressional meetings, right? And they're kind of like, I don't care kind of energy. We watched numerous, numerous people we watched several people who the public trusted, basically say they didn't care. Like they might have used pretty words. Some of them actually didn't even care to try to use pretty words. They literally said, so what? Some of them outright said they refused to answer questions in the public portion of the hearing. There are certain parts that are not public, but in the public part, they literally had no regard for the people who had entrusted them to be in those positions. There should be ramifications for that, and a constant shift of liability saying, oh, is this person supposed to handle it? Is this department? Is this place supposed to handle it? Okay, well, then handle it. There should be logical consequences in place when things like that happen. You should have certain things written out as to what the next steps are, right? We have seen in the comparative I gave that there are at least one other country that I just referenced in this live that actually was able to do that. Right? They put something in place and we seen immediate response. I watched something on the news within a couple days. I was watching the UK Parliament. They were discussing it. When I tell you they jumped right on top of that, they already had all these things lined out about how they wanted to handle what was going to be done, how positions should be stripped, like deep discussion. They saw something in the US news. I was watching one of them and they said, oh no, we're going to put this person under review. We want a full investigation. And they just do. I was just following and tracking certain stuff. Very responsive. It's not to say that the US Congress is not responsive. I do feel that structurally certain things are set up in a way where it does kind of tie their hands because you have to think about the origins of how they were kind of set up. Like the way that messages and things, the way that all that's set up. And I might do a whole live on that later. I love to have like my diagrams and visuals, not just me talking when I explain stuff like that. But I do feel like to a degree their hands are tied with the way that stuff was structured because generally you have to keep in mind historically we didn't have it where we had direct access to like the president so that they could just send us certain kinds of information. You know what I'm saying? Like there's certain checks and balances and certain methods and modes of communication that historically used to be or that was in place where modern times have modified but the processes I feel like have not. So there are certain things that I feel like potentially might be bottlenecking, but just just as one element or side was able to modify to modern times, others should do something similar so that they can protect the constituency that elected them in. um and not do like these shifts of liability. And that was just like one thing that I was watching on the news that made me think about not just the government, but like as a whole, when we look at systems, right? Because that's more patterned, whether you're at work, them shifting liability about an issue that happened at work, and to the point that you're getting physically sick because you're absorbing those hits as the individual, because you're pretty much taking this consequence or this punishment potentially because nobody else is being accountable for it. You had to take it on, even though it maybe wasn't yours. You had to absorb that impact. Now what? Right? Either that could look like you potentially, if it doesn't get resolved, right? It could look like you potentially leaving work or being off sick because you it's just manifested in such a way, right? Because of the way that we tend to process things. Or it could look like you potentially leaving that job. It look like you getting some type of write up, right? It's a family project. It could look like the project didn't happen the way it was supposed to, and people are dissatisfied. And now y'all got to take those hits because people are like, listen, this didn't come out right. But there's always a consequence. And consequence could be positive or negative, but it's always a consequence. And somebody has to absorb the impact. And the question is always who's absorbing the impact and how are they absorbing it? So when we say if that problem is everybody's problem, the question becomes, but then really whose problem is it really? Like who's taking on the accountability? Who's responsible? If everybody's responsible, who's truly responsible? That's my only question. It's just something that's been on my mind. I'm gonna look at. I see I got a couple of things here saying hi, hello once again to you all. Thank you all for being here with me. It appears late morning or high morning at this point. Uh Mostly just greetings. So greetings and salutations to you all. I know I have viewers from all over the globe. Once again, thank you for popping in. This is Adrian from Legally Everywhere. Child, we looking into everything. This is just kind of me dropping a note here about one of my thoughts about the responsibility elements. I feel like I'm gonna build this out further, have more discussions on it. I just really wanted to get your thoughts. That's why I wanted to jump on the mobile live. I just wanted to see what you guys think about that because it's something that's been on my mind, right? We see this everywhere. It's not like it's localized to one thing. We see this in numerous systems, right? That's why it's more patterned. The question is whether you're planning out your family reunion, uh, uh company bonding activity, or you're working in healthcare or CEO or the government or something even more so extensive than that, right? Like, how are we going to address those kind of things? Because if it's everybody's problem, then it kind of ends up being nobody's problem. And if it's nobody's problem, then it's not being addressed. And if it's not being addressed, that means it's sitting and lingering and snowballing into a bigger issue that's going to manifest into something else. And the problem is if it was already a problem, but it's getting larger, where do we go from there? So, like I said, this is Agent from Legally Everywhere. Child, we are looking into everything. Once again, good morning, salutations. And I wish you all the best as you move throughout your day. And thanks for visiting me on this live.